Tornado. Have you ever seen a tornado with your own eyes? Not on TV, not in a picture, but in person when the ground trembles under your feet and the wind roars as if an angry beast has broken free? It's something you can't forget. It's fear embodied in wind and destruction. It's the fury of nature unleashing its full force upon you. I've seen it. Jake stood in the middle of the ruins like an uprooted tree, unable to believe his eyes. His head was buzzing like a beehive, tears in his eyes that didn't want to fall. He looked at what was left of his home, of his life, and could not believe that all this had really happened. It seemed like a terrible dream that he was about to wake up from. But it wasn't a dream. It was a cruel reality. Sarah and Emily, where are they? That thought, like an icy needle, pierced his heart. He awoke from his daze and sprinted toward the spot where their house used to stand. He ran, stumbling over the rubble, feeling no pain. He called out to Sarah and Emily, tearing his throat, but all he heard in response was silence, an ominous, crushing silence that seemed even more terrifying than the roar of the tornado. There was almost nothing left of the house, just a pile of rubble mixed with personal belongings, furniture, pieces of metal, and splintered wood. Everything was covered with a layer of dust and dirt, as if someone had deliberately tried to erase all traces of their past life. His heart was pounding frantically in his chest, his breath coming in short gasps. Jake could feel the tears running down his cheeks, mixing with the dirt. He began desperately picking through the rubble, grabbing whatever he could get his hands on. He tossed the debris aside as if it weighed nothing, though each one was heavy and sharp. He searched for some sign, some hope. The road to the city was blocked by fallen trees, broken wires, and piles of debris. It had turned into an impassable swamp, as if the elements had deliberately cut him off from the outside world. There was no communication. The phone didn't work. The radio was silent. Jake realized that there was no outside help. He was alone with this tragedy, all alone, in the middle of a shattered world. Despair began to creep up on him like a snake, coiling its icy ring around his heart and soul. Terrible images flashed through his mind. Sarah and Emily, covered in rubble, helpless and wounded, begging for help. He tried to push the thoughts away, but they came back again and again, more and more intrusive and painful. Doubts began to plague him. What if he was too late? What if they were already dead? What if he couldn't save them? He felt helpless and worthless, as if he were not worthy to be a husband and father. But in the back of his mind, there was still a spark of hope. His love for Sarah and Emily was like an anchor that kept him from sinking into despair. He knew he had to fight. He must find them. He must save them. Gathering the rest of his strength, Jake continued to remove the rubble. He worked like a man possessed, feeling neither fatigue nor pain. He looked for any sign, any hint that Sarah and Emily were still alive. He found Emily's favorite doll, a teddy bear with a torn-off paw. He found a tattered wedding photograph of him and Sarah, young and happy. He found his old work overalls that Sarah always liked to patch up. These little pieces of his past life, like shards of a mirror, reminded him of what he had lost and what he was fighting for. He screamed their names, tearing his throat out, but all he heard in response was the howling of the wind walking through the ruins and the ominous silence that pressed down on him like a huge stone. Time passed, and hope melted away. But Jake didn't give up. He knew he had to keep going until he found his loved ones. As long as there was any hope at all, he had no right to stop. The sun was almost over the horizon, and dusk had fallen on the ruins, painting them in ominous shades of gray and purple. Jake continued to pick through the rubble like an automaton, feeling neither time nor fatigue. His hands burned with fire, his back aching with exertion. But he didn't stop. He knew that Sarah and Emily were depending on him, and he couldn't let them down. Suddenly, through the howling of the wind and the cracking of debris, he heard a faint, barely audible groan. He froze, like a hunting dog that smells game, and listened. The moan was repeated. It was coming from under the rubble, where Emily's nursery used to be. Jake's heart raced at breakneck speed. "Emily!" he whispered, and rushed to where the moaning came from, as if it were a beacon in a raging sea. It became even more difficult to remove the rubble. The rubble was heavy and unstable, as if it were trying to resist his efforts, threatening to collapse at any moment and bury him beneath it. But Jake paid no attention to the danger. He knew Emily was under there, and he had to get to her, no matter what it took. He pulled the rubble away, screaming with exertion, praying to himself that it wouldn't collapse. He saw Emily's childhood things: a tattered princess picture book, a broken doll with its head ripped off, a favorite cuddly dog with faded eyes. Each of these things, like a shard of broken mirror, stabbed into his heart, reminding him of what he could lose. In his mind, like an old film, the memories came flooding back. Emily, laughing and happy, running towards him across the field, sunflowers reaching for her like the sun, her little arms around him smelling of milk and flowers and saying, "Daddy, I love you more than anything in the world." He could not let that little star go out, that ringing laughter go silent forever. At last, after a long and agonizing effort, he reached the place from which the moaning had come. He saw Emily. She was lying under the rubble, pinned down by a massive beam that had crushed her legs. Her face was bloody and dirty, her eyes full of fear and pain, but she was alive. It was a miracle. "Daddy," she whispered in a weak, trembling voice, and tears showed on her cheeks, mixing with the dirt and blood. Jake rushed to her, trying to free her from the rubble. He spoke tender words to her, comforting her, promising her that everything would be all right. He stroked her head, wiped the dirt and tears from her face. He did everything he could to make her feel safe. But the beam was too heavy. He couldn't move it no matter how hard he tried. He realized he didn't have the strength. "Don't cry, Emily," he said, trying to soothe her in a trembling voice. "Daddy will think of something now. I'll be sure to get you out, I promise." He tried to put rocks and boards under the beam to lift it, but nothing worked. The beam was too heavy, and all his efforts were in vain. He screamed in despair, calling for help, but no one heard him. There was only silence and darkness around him. He felt completely helpless. At that moment he remembered Sarah. Where is she? Was she alive? He glanced in the direction where their bedroom used to be, but there were only piles of rubble. Not a sound came from there. His heart clenched with dread. What if Sarah was there, too, under the rubble? What if she was hurt? Or worse? He couldn't bear it. He realized he couldn't leave Emily alone. He'd made her a promise. But he couldn't leave Sarah either. He loved them both more than life, and he couldn't choose who to save. He faced a terrible choice, torn between his love for his wife and his daughter, between duty and despair. We see them often, here in Kansas. Every summer, when the sun is scorching the earth and the air is stifling and heavy, like before a thunderstorm. We feel them coming, by the changes in nature, by the way the animals behave. We know they are coming. But when they come, fear grips you. Suddenly, through the noise in his ears, he heard Sarah's voice. It came from far away, from under the rubble, as if from another world, as if from the grave itself. "Jake. Help. I'm here. Can't breathe." There was so much pain and despair in that short word, gasping, that it seemed to pierce through Jake's heart like an icy arrow. The word gasp echoed in Jake's head, tearing his heart apart. He looked at Emily lying under the beam, her eyes full of fear and pain, begging for help. He'd made her a promise that he wouldn't leave her, but Sarah was dying somewhere out there, under the rubble, gasping in the darkness. "I'll be back, Emily," he said, his voice trembling with tension and impending despair. "I have to help Mum. Promise I'll be very quick." He crawled carefully away from Emily, careful not to hurt her, and rushed in the direction Sarah's voice had come from. Night had descended upon the land, shrouding everything around them in thick, impenetrable darkness. The moon was hidden behind the clouds, and the only light was the occasional glimmer of stars barely breaking through the dust and smoke. Jake took every step with great difficulty. He stumbled over the debris, fell, scratched his arms and legs, but got up again and again, driven forward by a desperate desire to save Sarah. He called her name, but the wind carried his words away, drowning them out with its howls. At last he reached the spot where their bedroom had once stood. Now there was just a huge pile of rubble piled on top of each other, like an ominous pyramid erected in honor of destruction and death. "Sarah!" he shouted, tearing up his throat, his voice broken with screaming and exhaustion. "I am here!" "Where are you?" "I'm here," answered a faint, barely audible voice coming from somewhere under the rubble. "I'm trapped. Can't move." Jake rushed to dismantle the wreckage, working with a frenzied fury as if possessed. He tossed aside boards, bricks, pieces of metal, feeling no pain or fatigue. He tore the ground with his hands, tearing them to blood like a beast digging a hole. But the debris wouldn't budge. They were too heavy, too numerous. They seemed alive, resisting his efforts, unwilling to let go of their prey. Jake realized that time was running out. Sarah was gasping for breath, and every second could be her last. He had to act faster, more efficiently, but how? In desperation, he grabbed a piece of rebar lying nearby and began to use it as leverage, trying to push the debris aside. The rebar bent and broke, but Jake didn't give up. He worked tirelessly, sweating and bleeding as if trying to pull Sarah out of death's clutches. Suddenly, one of the debris, held on only by a miracle, slipped and rolled down, threatening to block Sarah completely. "Jake, look out!" she shouted in a weak voice. "Get away! Save yourself! There's no saving me now!" But Jake didn't listen to her. He couldn't leave Sarah. He loved her more than life, and he would do anything to save her, even if it cost him his own life. Gathering all his remaining strength, he planted his feet on the ground and pulled the lever as hard as he could. The debris rattled, groaned, and finally shifted, freeing Sarah from the trap. Jake rushed over to her, picked her up in his arms like she was nothing, and carried her out of the ruins, just moments before the rubble collapsed, burying all his hopes and dreams. He lowered Sarah to the ground, her face as pale as linen, her breathing weak and intermittent. But she was alive. He had saved her. Her face was as pale as the moon on a starless night, and her breathing was weak and intermittent, like a burning coal. With his last strength, he pressed his cheek against her cheek, feeling her faint warmth. "I saved you," he whispered with just his lips. But the thought of Emily throbbed in his mind. She was left there, under the rubble, small and defenseless. We had to go back, had to save her. But how? He was exhausted, his body trembling with fatigue, his arms burning with fire, and black spots floating in his eyes. He couldn't feel his legs or arms, just a dull, aching pain that permeated his whole being. Jake realized that one more effort might be his last. He felt that his strength was failing him, that he was about to pass out. But he couldn't give up. He couldn't let himself fall. He had to save Emily. Gathering the last crumbs of will, he tried to rise, but his legs wouldn't obey him, and he collapsed to the ground again next to Sarah. Helplessness swept over him like an icy wave. Despair squeezed his heart like a vice. He felt like the most worthless and helpless man on earth. He closed his eyes, and Emily appeared before his mind's eye. Her ringing laughter, her radiant eyes, her little hands reaching for him. "Daddy," he heard her soft voice. And that voice, like an electric shock, jolted his consciousness, gave him his strength back. He couldn't let her down. He couldn't let her die. Gathering all his resolve, he tried to rise again. And this time, he succeeded. He got to his feet, wobbling and stumbling, but he got up. He took a few steps towards the ruins, but then his gaze fell on Sarah. She lay unconscious, defenseless and helpless. He couldn't leave her alone. Two thoughts struggled in his head: to save Emily and not to leave Sarah. He was torn between his love for his wife and daughter, between duty and despair. And suddenly, he realized he mustn't choose. He must do everything he could to save them both. He looked round. Darkness, ruins, wind. He was alone. Or was he just imagining it? As he listened, he picked up some sounds: muffled voices, footsteps, the cracking of twigs. Someone was close by. He shouted again, "Help! Somebody help!" And this time, he was answered. "We're here, Jake! Hold on! We're coming!" Out of the darkness, like ghosts, figures of men with lanterns in their hands appeared, and the first one Jake saw was Tom, his neighbor. But in the light of the lantern, Tom's face looked ashen and aged 10 years. There was such pain in his eyes that Jake felt uneasy. "Tom," Jake whispered. "What happened?" Tom remained silent, head down. Then, pulling himself together, he spoke. "Mary, she's gone. The tornado. She's gone." Jake Olson knew this land like the back of his hand. He didn't just know it, he felt it. Every morning he woke with the dawn, feeling the vibration of life pulsing through this Kansas soil. He watched his grandfather, bent under the weight of years, but with an undying fire in his eyes, sowing the first seed. He remembered his father's hands, sweat-smelling and earthy, teaching him how to operate the tractor. Now his own hands, just as strong and heavy, held the wheel of his own destiny, bound inextricably to these fields. Olson Farm was not just a business, not just a source of income. It was a living organism that breathed with him, rejoiced in his successes, and shuddered at his failures. Jake felt like he'd been kicked in the butt. Mary, kind, compassionate Mary, always ready to help. He couldn't believe she was dead. "I'm so sorry, Tom," Jake muttered, not knowing what to say. Tom lifted his head and looked at Jake. There was pain in his eyes, but determination glowed in them as well. "I know nothing will bring Mary back, but I have to help you, Jake. Help Sarah and Emily. I know that's what Mary would want." Without another word, Tom rushed to the ruins where Emily lay. He worked like a man possessed, tossing aside debris as if he felt neither fatigue nor pain. Tom was followed by the other neighbors. They worked silently, harmoniously, like a single machine. They helped Jake get to Emily, lifted the beam together, carried her out of the rubble together. They surrounded them with care and attention, gave them food and drink, warmed them with their bodies. And on that terrible night, Jake saw a real miracle. A miracle of human kindness and mutual help. A miracle that helped him survive and keep his faith in the best. A miracle that was especially evident in Tom, who had lost his wife but had found the strength to help others. In the days and weeks that followed, as the debris was removed and first aid was administered, Jake sensed how hard it would be for them to rebuild. Too much had been destroyed. Too much had been lost. But Jake knew they were not alone. It was during these difficult times that Jake learned what a real family, real friends, and real neighbors are. He realized that the most important things in life are not money and possessions, but love, compassion, and mutual help. It took long months to rebuild. They rebuilt new homes, new farms, a new life. But not everything was as easy as it seemed. Every day was full of difficulties with finances, with labor shortages, with memories. But they never gave up. Tom, though broken by grief, became Jake's right-hand man, and together they helped each other. He often saw Emily, now older, playing on the destroyed part of the house, and it reminded him that they shouldn't forget those who were gone. Every year when tornado season came, Jake was reminded of the tragedy. He knew that their story was unfortunately not unique, that hundreds, if not thousands, of people die every year from tornadoes, hurricanes, and other elements. that there was no guarantee it wouldn't happen again. That is why, every year, the people of Kansas and all of America gathered together to honor the memory of the dead and once again remind each other of the importance of mutual aid. And though the tornado scars would stay with them forever, they learned to live with them, learned to appreciate every day, every moment they spent together. They built new homes, new farms, new lives. And in every new building, in every new ear of wheat, in every new dawn, they saw a symbol of rebirth, a symbol of hope, a symbol that good always triumphs over evil. They always remembered those they had lost and those who had helped them. They always remembered that kindness is the most valuable thing they have, and that it should be cherished and shared with others. And every year, when the sky darkened and the wind picked up, Jake would look at Emily and Sarah, hug them tight, and know that they were together. They wouldn't break. They would stand. They'll always be together, supporting each other and helping others. It's a family saga engraved in every log of the old barn, in every crack in the front of the house, in every ear of wheat ripening under the hot Kansas sun. And Sarah. Sarah was his harbor, his quiet haven in the raging ocean of life. They'd met in high school at a barn dance. He, the shy and awkward farm boy, and she, the city girl with a mischievous twinkle in her eye. It seemed as if there could be nothing in common between them. But fate had it differently. They fell in love, a love that was quiet, deep, and unshakable. Sarah knew how to see beauty in simple things, knew how to appreciate what they had. She brought light and joy into his life, taught him to dream and believe in the best. Every morning, waking up next to her, Jake felt like the happiest man on earth. And Emily. Emily was their little miracle, their long-awaited child. She'd been born in the middle of the harvest, and Jake had almost missed it because he'd been so preoccupied with work. But the first time he held her in his arms, he realized that everything in his life had changed forever. Emily was like a little bird, fragile and defenseless. She needed his care and protection, and he was ready to give his life for her. She grew up curious and mischievous, inheriting her mother's love of adventure and her father's hard work and perseverance. She loved helping Jake in the fields, watering the flowers and talking to the animals. She was their little star, lighting up there every day with her laughter and boundless love. Sarah liked to say, watching Jake play with Emily at sunset, "You are my life, my family, my everything. I can't imagine myself without you." And Jake knew it was true. They were one, an unbreakable bond of love and trust. He couldn't imagine his life without the open spaces, the sunrises over the vast fields, the feeling of hard work in his hands, Sarah's loving gaze, and Emily's laughter. But even in paradise, sometimes there are thunderstorms, and on that day the wind brought not freshness, but alarm. The sky darkened as if a black veil had been thrown over it, and the sun, so bright and gentle, was hidden behind leaden clouds. The radio was blaring a storm warning. A tornado was coming over Kansas. Jake frowned, looking at the horizon. He'd seen tornadoes before, but they always avoided his farm, as if they were afraid to disrupt the idyll of his life. Today there was an ominous tension in the air, as if nature itself were preparing for something terrible. The tornado struck suddenly, like an angry beast breaking free from a dark cage. The howl of the wind blocked out all sound, and the ground shook as if in death throes. Jake managed to get the cattle into shelter, praying that the animals would survive the storm. He wanted to get home to be with Sarah and Emily, but he realized there was no time left. The storm was coming too fast. He crammed himself into the basement of the old barn, huddled against the cold stone wall, and began to pray. He prayed for his loved ones, for his land, for this to be over as soon as possible. When it stopped, there was an ominous silence, broken only by the crackling of rubble and the blowing of the wind, which had almost died down. Jake climbed out of the basement and saw that his world had ceased to exist. The house was gone. The barn was a wreck. The fields were strewn with rubbish and broken trees. Animals lay dead here and there, and the survivors let out pitiful cries as if asking for help. The tornado had taken everything from the farmer. All that was left was love and courage.